in your previous life you were a lawyer.
Mm-hmm.
So why, when and how did you morph into a producer?
It was sort of fairly evolutionary. I used to be a solicitor, and then I was a director of the Arts Law Centre of Australia, and so became more in a sort of arts management role, and went from there to the executive director of ASDA, the Screen Directors Guild. So I sort of went from being a lawyer to, I suppose, an arts manager, and being at ASDA, I met Chris Hilton, of course, a number of other directors and film practitioners, and after about 3 years in that job, which was a terrific job, I just had this urge to get my hands dirty. So sounded out Chris about whether they needed someone at Hilton Cordell, which was the first company I started, and I suppose my legal and business affairs were the skill set I could bring to them. Unfortunately, at the time, both Michael Cordell and Chris Hilton had a number of international co-productions on the wings, a big 5-part series called Irish Empire, which was actually a 3-way with UK, Irish and Australian co-production monies, as well as Renzo Piano, which was a profile on the architect, which had a lot of money from Germany and Italy and elsewhere. So they suddenly realised having an in-house lawyer might do the trick. So, it's a bit of a win-win for both of us. And, it was a wonderful entree for me into beginning, to become a producer.
And when you worked there at Hilton Cordell, what was the business model for that company, and where did you fit into that?
I started at Hilton Cordell in about 1998, and the business model at the time was a partnership between Michael Cordell and Chris Hilton. They had been together, I think, about 3 years or so. They had been two, I suppose, what you call independent or suitcase producers, literally working in the studios in the back of their houses. They met on the beach in Bondi through mutual friends, and they'd sort of admired one another's work, and so they came together as Hilton Cordell. So it's a partnership between them. I was, until Hilton Cordell was wound up about a year or so ago, was an employee but also a producer there. So the business model was fairly simple in the sense that really it relied on cash flow from projects. Occasionally, obviously, there were loans from the bank, especially to start it up, but essentially it went from project to project, as well as general support occasionally from agencies like the Australian Film Commission and other areas, but generally it was a project-based cash flow model.
The progress of the company, it was a very young company when you joined it, so were you able to see how, was it learning as you go, mistakes were made, decisions were taken that are later shown to have been risky? What sort of things did you learn in that environment?
Well, I learned very quickly. I mean, I was fortunate because I had two very good mentors and, now friends, Michael and Chris. And Chris we're now working in a new organisation, Essential Viewing. And both of them were terrific as far as giving me the opportunity to become a producer and learn the ropes. I suppose I had business and maybe admin and maybe bookkeeping skills that I'd learned from my previous work experience. But of course I had a lot to learn about the industry, just becoming familiar with industry practice and process, learning editorial skills, how to improve a script, how to improve a film at rough cut, so on and so forth. So I think the management skills were something I could bring to it, but obviously learning, inherent film skills, and those two were terrific, and just, I suppose, being exposed to film process. As to mistakes, I suppose, Hilton Cordell itself was a very successful entity. I think most people know the brand. I think arguably it's one of the top documentary production companies in Australia, and that was, I suppose, reflected by the large number of international co-productions, the Irish Empire and various other both one-off and series documentaries that we did, and by the end even starting to do some TV drama. So in many ways, I don't think they have many mistakes. I certainly learnt the hard way. Maybe the hard way is too strong, but I know the first project I did, which was a half hour for SBS on Chunky Move Dance Company. It was an arts documentary with support from New South Wales Film and TV Office. But it was one of those situations where there was time critical. It was following Gideon Orbazanek, the director, and a particular piece that he was rehearsing, getting prepared to go to premiere, and we were looking at sort of, it was technically a challenging work, and was Gideon able to cut the mustard to prepare it in time without, self-imploding. So we had to film, Gideon wasn't going to wait for us. It was premiering in a month or so time, so we had to start filming now. And there was a little bit of presumption on my part that because I got favourable readers' reports, that it would be a bit of a shoe-in for the FTO funding. But alas, as you quickly learn in this game, there's often, more demand for funds and available money. And I came a cropper when they came back and said, no, you weren't successful. And I'd already committed, the film crew. It was only a small film crew, but that was a steep learning curve.
So how did you solve that problem?
Look, I'm going to have to rack my brain now, but basically we went back to them, and I know Film Victoria came in with some money because it was based in Victoria, and I think we basically had to revise the budget, and unfortunately revise the budget downwards. I mean, it was an observational doc, and it was done on a smell of an oily rag, as often arts documentaries can be. And I think we had to make certain changes, which in the end, it was a half-hour documentary, didn't profoundly affect the finished product, but it certainly was a fairly stressful venture to start off on my first film with my first notch on the bedpost being a little bit flaccid.
So it was survival by the skin of your teeth.
Yeah, look, it's. I suppose that's one of the things, particularly, financing is obviously, a key part of the filmmaking process, and you have to always be prepared. It's like, being a Boy Scout, isn't it? Because things do happen, whether it's from the private market or even from public funding bodies. Increasingly now, money is so much more vulnerable, and you can never be too overconfident about these things, and you need to perhaps always have a contingency plan if certain amounts of money don't come through. Just as you need a contingency plan for, if certain events don't arise or certain personnel don't happen or suddenly become available. I mean, it's a risk venture film, so you always, simple insurance policy, you need to be able to think ahead and have a contingency plan in case something falls through.
And probably two contingency plans.
Two
contingency plans.
Yeah, well, exactly. It's foreseeing the potential risks or the potential turning points or things not evolving, and it happens. Documentaries are different types, but if you're doing an observational documentary, you're, and this is probably just as much the director's responsibility as the producer, but you're following certain people or certain events. But sometimes the events don't unfold as perhaps you anticipate, and perhaps as what you've written the treatment to lure the broadcasters and other financiers in. And then you think, oh, this is perhaps, from storytelling terms, a little bit on the weak side or uneventful. So therefore you have to rethink, and it's a collaboration thing, obviously, with the key crew to see where else we can take it, or perhaps rather than following, subject A, subject B is a lot more interesting, so you change your focus. So they're all things you have to be on your toes about.